3 years we've tried to arrange this visit. We've done it. I'm sure you'll be glad we did. Please give a warm Queens Voc welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. One of the pieces of news that almost nobody reports about is this fact. It's a fact that, I've learned from the United Nations, which is not an organization I typically quote from. But over the last 30 years, 1 billion people, that's billion with a B, right, have come out of poverty around the world. 1 billion people who used to be poor are no longer poor today. That's pretty cool. And when I talk about poor in this study, I'm talking about poor in a sense of living off of $1 a day or a few dollars a day. Right? Poor that even by American standards, is really, really poor. And how has this happened? How is it that 1 billion people around the world, and this is primarily in Asia, have come out of poverty over the last 30 years? And why is nobody celebrating this fact? Well, the reason it's happened is that in these countries, places like India, places like China, places like Vietnam, those countries have adopted elements of free market, elements of capitalism, elements of freedom. Not complete, not all the way, but a little bit. And it turns out, when you study history and you look back at the world, that when you leave people, when you give them a little bit of freedom, when you let them go into the kind of professions they love to go into, when you let them do the kind of business they love to do, when you let them buy the products they want to buy, when you leave them free to make decisions about their own life, about their own careers, about their own professions, what you get is entrepreneurship. What you get is the creation of business. What you get is the creation of hundreds of millions of jobs. And what you get is you allow people to rise out of poverty. Freedom works. It works anywhere it's tried, and it's worked in every period in history in which it's been tried. If you look at Western history, kind of Western Europe and America, if we think back about 250 years, and I know it's hard for anybody to think back 250 years, that's a long time, right? It's even longer than I've been alive. How many people were poor in the West? I mean, really poor, in a sense that they could barely eat. 250 years ago. Anybody want to throw out a number? Percentage of the population that was poor 250 years ago. 60. Anybody else? 80. 80 is closer than 60. 75. All right, 91. I'd say, I don't have an exact estimate, but I'd say somewhere around 95 to 97% of all people. Most people were farmers. Most people grew the food that they ate. They had no extra. There were no businesses, there were no jobs, there were no entrepreneurs. What was life expectancy? How long did people live 250 years ago in the West? 40, that's very good. 39. Average life expectancy 250 years ago was 39. I would be dead long ago. Most of your teachers, I suspect, right, would not be around 250 years ago, because the average age expectancy was 39. You guys would be approaching middle age. That's a joke, but anyway. What happened? How did we get from a life expectancy of 39, what What's your life expectancy? Anybody know what your average life expectancy is? At least 80. You guys probably will exceed 80 on average. You guys should expect to live to be 90 at least. Maybe even 100. Right? That's pretty cool. You can get a whole century. What happened? What has happened in the West to allow us to go from 97% dirt poor to almost nobody in America that poor today? Life expectancy of 39 to a life expectancy of maybe 85, 90, 100. Who knows what we're capable of? What has happened during that period? If you go back in human history and you look at standard of living, life expectancy, if you look at wealth, if you look at income, it looks very interesting. Go back 10,000 years. Income, wealth are like this. They're like flat. And they stay flat. They go up a little bit and down a little bit, like Rome was a better period. And then you get the Dark Ages and then it goes up and down. But basically it's flat. And then something happens. And it goes like that. Wealth, income, and life expectancy go like that. And when does that happen? What is the date that happens? Approximately. About 250 years ago, yeah? 1980. Wow, no. A lot before that. 1780s, more like it. The beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The beginning of free markets. The beginning of freedom, which is really represented by 1776, the beginning of this country, which for the first time in human history said individuals should be free to pursue their own life, to pursue their own happiness, to do what they believe is right for them, not to listen to some king who tells us what to do and what to behave and what jobs we should have and how to act. No, 1776 said, we don't want kings anymore. We don't want rulers. We don't want people to own us. We want to be free. We want to be able to do what we want to do. Right? We want to learn what we want to learn. We want to go into a career. We want to go into a career. We want to live for ourselves. The best life that we can live for ourselves. And what is the way in which human beings succeed and thrive? If you want to live for yourself, if you want to be successful, what is the tool that human beings use in order to succeed?
Education.
Yeah, education is the process, but what's the tool that you use in your education? What's the tool? What's the thing?
Your brain.
Your brain. Very good. Very good. She has a brain. If you think about making clothes, anybody know how to make clothes? Right? If you know how to skin an animal? Yeah. Dry the pelts? Yeah. Wow, you guys are good because I have no clue how to do this, right? You guys know how to grow food? Yeah. You do? That's pretty cool. But imagine the first guy or girl who figured out how to grow food. Right, for tens of thousands of years, human beings roamed around picking berries and killing animals for food, and nobody knew how to grow food. And then some genius, Einstein of his day, figured out that when a seed drops onto the ground and water, it rains, the thing that comes up is from the seed and was caused by the rain. That took genius to figure out. And then an entrepreneur, let's say that Bill Gates of his day, said, aha, if that's the case, I can accumulate seeds and grow them and create agriculture. Agriculture has only existed for 10,000 years, even though human beings have been around for a lot longer than that. So it took brains to figure out how to really grow food for all of us to eat, to grow the human population. It took brains to figure out how to make clothes, particularly really nice clothes, right? It takes brains to create this. Human beings survive by the use of their mind, by the use of their reason, by the use of their rational faculty. And what does reason need in order to be successful? If you're going to be successful using your mind, and you're educated, and you got an education, and you know how to use it, what do you need in order to be able to flourish, to be able to be successful, to really go out there into the world and really maximize your potential? What do you need? You need to be left alone. You need to be free. Because you know what destroys the mind? It's coercion. It's force. It's when people tell you, you have to think in a particular way. You have to do particular things. You're limited, right? They create boundaries on you. No, the human mind has all these amazing capacities. I could have never invented this. I don't know how many of you could have. I mean, you guys know agriculture, know how to make clothes, so maybe you could do this. I don't. This created imagination. You know how many people told Steve Jobs he couldn't do it? This was impossible. Nobody would ever buy it. This wouldn't be successful. And he did it anyway. Because he was free to do it anyway. And to take the risk. And you know what? A lot of people create stuff like this that fails. Steve Jobs failed. How many times did Steve Jobs fail? Anybody know?
No idea.
A lot. Twice, big time. He was fired from Apple. And then he created a company that you've never heard of called Next. That was a failure. You've never heard of it. But the third time, he succeeded. Because there was no king to tell him, you can't do that. You can't do that. He was free to go out and pursue it. Free markets produce this kind of stuff. Free markets work. They bring us out of poverty. They allow you to create, they allow people to create wonderful things. They allow people to test their minds, to go out there and use their brains, use their reason, use their rational faculty, to produce, to create, to build. And reason is something that was admired by people in the 18th century. You know what that period is called? The 18th century is called the Enlightenment. But there's another name for the Enlightenment. Anybody know what the other name for the Enlightenment is? The age of?
Prosperity.
Prosperity comes a little later, but the age of? The age of reason. The Enlightenment is called the age of reason. Because this is a period in which people respect the human mind. They respect rational thinking. And therefore they respect the individual. Because who thinks? You guys, is there collective consciousness up here?
Renaissance.
The Renaissance was before that. Right? Is there a collective mind? Do you guys think as a group?
No.
Really?
Yes.
I can't.
You think for yourself.
You think for yourself. Each one of you thinks. Now you can help each other think, right? You can challenge each other. But each one of you thinks for himself. Each one of you is the unit that actually exercises the rationality, the reason, the thinking. So each one of you is responsible for your own thinking and therefore for your own life. So two things came together in the 18th century. The two things came. Reason is really important. People valued it. And the individual is what reasons. And therefore the individual is really important. And to make the most of those two things, we create a political system that's free, that lets people go out there and exercise their individuality, their reason, their rationality. And that manifested in that. Remember, wealth and income stay flat, and then you get the Industrial Revolution, and wealth and income go like that. So, what we today should value is we should remember what they valued back then, because it worked. It got us out of poverty. It got us to where we are today. It got us into a position where we can have the wonderful things that we have today. Schools. How many kids went to school 250 years ago? Almost nobody. There were no schools. Nobody could afford schools. Right? What did kids do 250 years ago? Work at the farm. Right? From sunrise to sunset, they worked in the farm. What free markets have done, have liberated you guys to go to school. They allowed me to go to school. Because now we have enough wealth to be able to afford schools, to afford an education, to afford the pursuit of happiness. So we need to remember those things. Reason, individualism, and the system that those two ideas made possible, which is the system of free markets. A system which has made our lives so much better and is making the lives of kids everywhere in the world so much better. How many kids today in Africa go to school? Unfortunately, very few. Not none, but very few. And why don't they go to school? Because they don't have the wealth, they don't have the income, they can't afford to go to school. If you want them to go to school, what they need is what we have, and what Asia is now adopting. It's free market, it's property rights, it's individualism, and it's more than anything, a respect for the human mind. So, free markets have worked throughout history. Let's not abandon them. Let's not give them up. And for you who are starting out your lives, the most important thing you can respect, the most important thing that will lead to your individual success in life is this. It's your mind. Respect it, cultivate it, work hard at it, use it in every part of your life, and be an individual. If you have a brain, you can think. Don't let other people do the thinking for you. Be independent. Value your thoughts. Be an individual. You're special. You're unique because you have a unique mind, a unique brain. So, be rational. Pursue your values as an individual, and respect kind of the world in which we live, a world of freedom. It's unique. It's a unique point in history. Very few people throughout all of human history have been in this position that you have to really take advantage of the freedom we have today in the world. As limited as it might seem sometimes, we live in a great world out there. Thank you all, and I'll take questions. What time do we have? We're about 10, 15 minutes? All right, questions. Somebody must have something. It's a quiet group today. I can keep talking. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you explain the success of China with their economy in like the last decade or so, given that they really don't have the true freedom that you want?
Good. So how do I explain the success of China really over the last 30 years, since 1978, which is where they really started shifting? How do I explain China, given that they're not completely free, that they still have real limitations? So this is what happened. I'll give you a quick history lesson on China, right? China used to be a communist country, which meant that nobody owned anything. Everything was communal. Everything was owned by the state. Everything was owned. So when you did agriculture, you didn't own a piece of land and cultivate it. You owned it as a commune. Everybody owned it, and you never benefited from the work that you produced. The group benefited from it. And guess what happened to the production of food in China when people weren't responsible and people didn't own the product of their own, what they actually produced? What happened? They produced nothing. In the 1960s and 70s, somewhere between 40 and 60 million people died of starvation in China. 40 to 60 million people in one of the most fertile countries in terms of the land they have in the world. 40 to 60 million people died of starvation because of communism, because of this communal attitude, because of this collectivistic view. In 1976, Mao Zedong died, which was the best thing ever to happen to China in its entire history. Because once he died, people were willing to think outside of the box. Within the so-called Communist Party, they were willing to think, and they saw the poverty, the misery, the starvation happening around them. And what they discovered, it's really fascinating. In 1978, they discovered this little village in China, which was producing way above the quotas that everybody else was producing. They were doing really, really well. And they went to this village, and they started investigating, what's the difference? And what they discovered was in this village, the people got together, and instead of doing the communal thing, they decided to divvy up the land and say, Joe, you're responsible for that piece of land, and anything you produce is yours. Harry, you're responsible for that piece of land, and anything you do is yours. And they were doing this in secret because they were afraid that the Communist Party would come down and shut them down. And they were producing huge amounts. Because you know what? When you're responsible for something, you take care of it. It's yours. You're incentivized to produce a lot because you're going to benefit from it. And the genius of the people then in China was not to shut this down, but to realize that this worked and then expand it throughout the country. And this is what happened time and time again in China over the last 30 years. Is they discovered pockets of freedom. Pockets where there was no central planning and no central control. And those pockets mushroomed. For example, close to Hong Kong, there is the region close to Hong Kong was very, very poor. And they decided to do an experiment. They didn't know what they were doing, but they saw Hong Kong was very rich, and this region was very poor. So they said, you know what? We'll implement the same ideas as Hong Kong. We'll allow freedom in this region, not in the rest of China, but we'll allow businesses to start, entrepreneurs, and we'll allow people to make money, not take it all away from them and divvy it up. We'll allow them to actually make money. And this region went from being the poorest part of China to the richest part of China in like 5 to 10 years. And then they said, wow, this works. So let's do it in another region, and then in another region, and in another region. So what happened in China is that they've allowed economic freedom. In other words, they've allowed people to cultivate their land and benefit from it, to take profits. They've allowed people to start businesses and take a profit, which was not allowed under capitalism. What they have not allowed is for voting. So they've not allowed for political freedom. There's certain limitations on free speech, although, you know, those limitations are not as bad as they used to be. They've been loosened over the years. So this is my point about, even when you allow people a little bit of freedom, not all of the freedoms that we can enjoy here in America, you get huge rewards off of it. The more freedom you allow them, the bigger the rewards. But even a little bit of freedom goes a long, long way. Repression, central planning, central control, socialization, communes of any type fail miserably. Miserably. And yet when you allow people a little bit of freedom, bam, they create wealth, they create jobs, they prosper. Now, China would be a lot better if it allowed freedom in a wider spectrum of human activities. It's sad that people who write books or who speak go to jail in China for their ideas. That is tragic. And China is certainly not a model to emulate. But it's still true that when 1 billion people come out of poverty, it's time to celebrate. That's a good thing, even if they're not completely free and as free as we would love them to be. So that's kind of China, the short version. There's a wonderful book that I recommend called How China Became Capitalist by Ronald Coase, who's a famous economist. And I recommend, if you're interested in any of these ideas, I recommend that you read, I know a lot of you are reading Anthem, but The Fountainhead is a wonderful book, particularly if you're in 11th and 12th grade. We've got essay contests. You should submit essays. I mean, we give a lot of cash prizes on these essays, and it looks great on the resume, to be a finalist or semi-finalist on these essays. So submit essays. Ask your teachers about our essay contest. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you think that the United States has greatly affected the way other nations were for example,
So the United States has affected many other nations in?
like in the way that they run our country, for example, economically?
Yes, has the United States affected the way other people, other countries have changed their economies? Absolutely. In a huge way, particularly, not so much today, because today, one could argue, we're becoming less free, just as other countries are becoming more free. So we're heading in the wrong direction, in my view, we're heading in the wrong direction, just as other countries are heading in the right direction. But if you go back 200 years, 150 years, 100 years, the United States was considered a model to be emulated, was considered the leader. You know, when this country was founded, and this country was founded on an incredible contradiction, right? On the one hand, it was founded as a free country. On the other hand, it had slavery, which is horrific, right? But the principles of freedom were articulated in the founding of this country for the first time in human history. No other country had ever been founded on the principle that the individual owns his own life. In all of human history, for hundreds of thousands of years, the idea was your life belongs to fill in the blank. A king, the tribe, the religious leader. It belongs to God. It belongs to somebody, but not to you. God forbid it should belong to you. The whole point of the